powerful explosions in Kstovo, Voronezh, and Moscow, flight restrictions in Domodedovo. The SBU, using FPV-2 drones, is striking Russian positions in Pokrovsk. North Korean soldiers have already arrived in Zaporizhzhia. The situation is heating up. In Geneva, 28 of Trump's points were rewritten during negotiations between Ukraine and the US. What has changed? Russia is disguising military purchases. Mosfilm and museums are secretly buying drones, RAP, and Starlink. A prison riot. Convicts who were being taken to war killed a guard and escaped. Residents of Belgorod are asking the shaman to direct the money from his concerts toward generators, but the video in his chat was deleted instantly. Hello, my name is YULIIA KOKHAN, and right now here are the top stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so that we don't lose each other on YouTube anymore. Nights in Russia are becoming increasingly tense. Sobyanin has confirmed a new drone attack on Moscow. The Russian capital once again woke up to the sounds of air defense systems. Due to the threat of a UAV strike, arrivals and departures at Domodedovo were restricted.
The Ministry of Defense's air defense forces destroyed the unmanned device that attacked Moscow. Emergency service specialists are working at the site where the debris fell.
Loud explosions also rang out in Kstovo, Nizhny Novgorod region on the night of November 24th. According to Russian sources, at least 10 powerful explosions occurred in the city's industrial zone. Kstovo is home to two strategic facilities, the Lukoil oil refinery and the Kstovo petrochemical plant. After the attack, Nizhny Novgorod Airport was forced to suspend operations for at least several hours. The night was not quiet in Voronezh region either. The Russians reported shooting down 24 drones and debris, damaging several private houses and one apartment building. Ukrainian drones also flew into Penza, where they forced the local airport to halt operations. In addition, on the night of November 24th, Russian air defense activity was recorded in other regions of Russia as well, specifically in the Belgorod region and over the Krasnodar region. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Death, as usual, reported that everything was shot down. Allegedly, 93 Ukrainian drones in one night. But for some reason, everything is burning and exploding. We, meanwhile, are waiting for official confirmation of the strikes from the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. In the meantime, please like this video and let's move on. And next, ladies and gentlemen, is a story about how residents of Belgorod turned to the singer Shaman for help. And
we're raising money for generators so that Shaman's concert can take place. While the whole country is chipping in for generators for the Belgorod region, children are walking home from school in the dark, schools are handing out reflective tape, and the city is preparing for not one, but two Shaman concerts. Moreover, many of the tickets have been purchased by government-funded organizations. We're not against music. It's important for people to feel that life goes on. But if an artist comes to Belgorod, we want them to see real life, not just the spotlight. Dear Yaroslav, will it truly be powerful? If you direct part of the proceeds from the concert to help those affected or to buy those same generators, then your performance will truly be a victory. After all, that's exactly what your tour is called.
in fact, the Belgorod branch of the New People Party recorded an appeal to Shaman. The video was sent to the artist's chat, and the admins deleted this, so to speak, cry for help after just 15 seconds. And here you might ask, what are the local authorities doing if people are asking for help from, God forgive me, Shaman? Well, for example, the governor of the Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, is currently very busy. The official is asking Putin for permission to run for a second term.
The governor of the Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, stated that he is ready to run for a second term in 2026, but only if he receives Putin's approval. He does not intend to make the decision on his own. In fact, Gladkov has confirmed what was already clear: his political future completely depends on the Kremlin.
In short, people of Belgorod, you'll probably have to sort things out with the generators on your own, since, as you can see, the shaman doesn't care, and Mr. Gladkov is currently very busy. And now let's move on to the peace negotiations. Recently, delegations from Ukraine and the US met in Geneva. The agenda of the Swiss meeting was to discuss a peace plan. As a result of the negotiations, a new framework for peace was prepared and refined. The exact text is unknown, but the document clearly states respect for Ukraine's sovereignty. Therefore, it can be said that the meeting was not in vain. And this was stated by the heads of the delegations.
The negotiations were constructive, focused, and full of mutual respect, which underscored the shared commitment to achieving a just and lasting peace. Both sides found the consultations extremely productive, and the discussions demonstrated significant progress in aligning positions and defining clear next steps. The parties confirmed that any future agreement must fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty and ensure a sustainable and just peace. And
although the US calls the negotiations constructive and fruitful, that doesn't mean everything went smoothly. They say the talks were tense. As proof of this, photos of a pen allegedly broken by NSDC Secretary Rustem Umarov are being circulated online. But let's get back to the content of the document, even if it's only a draft. They say that every point important to Ukraine was fought for tooth and nail, and for good reason. As reported by the New York Times, the working version of the peace plan already differs from the previously published 28 points.
I can confirm that we have made real progress and are moving toward a just and lasting peace.
Alongside the negotiations in Geneva, work on the peace plan was also underway in the EU. The Telegraph has published the European alternative to Trump's peace plan.
The European proposal does not limit the size of Ukraine's defense forces, does not prohibit Ukraine's membership in NATO, and explicitly states that Kyiv will not be forced into a neutral status. Ukraine may also, at its own discretion, invite friendly forces onto its territory, including troops from countries, coalitions, or any willing parties. The European document calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, which should be monitored by the US and European countries. Legally, binding security guarantees for Ukraine, including the United States, modeled after NATO's Article 5. No territorial concessions as a starting condition. Border issues will be discussed after the ceasefire is established. Return of control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the Kakhovka dam to Ukraine. Full restoration and compensation for damages, including the use of frozen Russian assets. The possibility of automatically imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation in case of violation of the peace terms. And
again about Geneva. CBS News reports that Zelensky may travel to Washington to discuss the most sensitive issues of the peace plan with President Trump. So once again, the negotiations in Geneva, for all their shortcomings, did yield some results.
It is important that there is a dialogue with American representatives, and there are signals that President Trump's team is hearing us.
But CBS writes not only about Zelensky's visit to the US, but also about the possibility of the US Secretary of the Army visiting Russia.
A possible outcome of the Geneva talks is that Army Secretary Dan Driscoll may visit Russia or meet with Russian officials elsewhere, according to another American official.
By the way, speaking of Russia, the Kremlin says they have no knowledge whatsoever about the results of the Ukraine-US negotiations in Geneva.
We have not received any format so far. Of course, we are currently and actively monitoring the situation, and there have been numerous reports coming in. I've been traveling for several days, but officially, we have not received anything yet.
Well, there's no real need for Russia to delve into anything because their demands don't really change much from day to day. The Kremlin wants Ukraine to surrender. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War write that Russia will only agree to a peace plan that means Ukraine's capitulation. And the problem is that, for the most part, Trump simply doesn't care. According to sources cited by the Washington Post, he wants to end the war but isn't particularly interested in the terms of the peace plan being promoted on his behalf.
An American official who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of the issue, said that the president was not that involved in the details. You tell Trump, I'll try to make a deal. He replies, great, see what you can do. And that's the full extent of the information he has.
But along with this, The Economist writes that the deadline for signing the agreement is tentative. Let me remind you, the date mentioned was November 27th. Now they're saying that Trump has extended the deadline by another week. Who knows, maybe Trump's week will turn into 2, 3, or even 10. And finally, the topic of the negotiations. While the delegations were talking in Geneva, Trump staged yet another episode called Ukrainian Authorities Are Ungrateful. And do you know what happened after that? Ukraine expressed its gratitude. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful to you for your support and proud that we have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well where you are watching us from and whether people in your country support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And for now we continue. The most interesting part is coming up next. And while in Geneva, diplomats are discussing the terms of peace and security guarantees for Ukraine, fierce fighting continues on the front lines. In Kupiansk, the battles are ongoing in the central, southwestern and northwestern parts of the city. According to military correspondent Bohdan Miroshnikov, several dozen positions have changed hands 5 or 6 times. And this struggle continues.
The occupiers are also continuing to divert our reserves to the west of the city. Overall, the situation in Kupiansk has not been as favorable for the enemy for the past 2 weeks as it was before. Our soldiers are clearing the scum from the city meter by meter. In
the area of YULIIA, 4 Ukrainian strike bombers, Vampir from the 5th Assault Brigade, are destroying groups of Russian assault troops. Russian media report that DPRK troops have arrived in this area after 2 months of training. At the same time, in the Zaporizhzhia region, a Russian assault regiment is suffering from widespread drunkenness. This is reported by the partisan movement Atesh.
Our agents report that new servicemen are dying not from bullets but from alcohol poisoning. The command is deliberately covering up this situation. Drunk soldiers are a convenient resource. They don't ask questions and go into assaults warmed by alcohol. This provokes harsh conflicts with sober fighters. The drunk ones expose them to danger, make noise. They shine flashlights, fire into the air, shout while on duty, forget their weapons, and even open friendly fire on their own.
According to Deep State, the enemy has advanced in Pokrovsk and near Dakhinsk. However, listen to how the situation in Pokrovsk is commented on by journalist and military observer Vasily Pinyo. In
Pokrovsk, the situation is currently very uncomfortable and unpleasant for the Russians in terms of the fact that while they do have logistics in the southern outskirts, that is, they are able to move Pokrovsk and assault groups through. On May 1st, from the south, from the Chunishinova area, they enter those same Sobachevka districts, assault groups go in, but they cannot move beyond the railway line. The railway is located right here. The Russians are unable to move past this line. And what our paratroopers are essentially trying to do right now is to implement the scenario of creating a more or less stable line of combat engagement. In other words, to try to establish it. Because what has been happening in Pokrovsk over the past few days is just utter chaos. Now, literally in the last few days over the past week, the situation has become somewhat more orderly.
Operators from the 3rd Special Operations Forces Regiment carried out a successful raid near Pokrovsk. They destroyed and captured enemy forces, evacuated the wounded, and used several types of drones, both ground and aerial. So, are we going to make it out alive? I guess we have a ticket. And the special forces struck enemy positions in Pokrovsk and in temporarily occupied territories using FP2 drones with 105-kilogram combat payloads, which ensured the high effectiveness of the operation. More details about what has been happening on the front lines in recent days are in our military review.
In the past 24 hours, 3 platoons have been eliminated, and more than a platoon have been wounded. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine shared details about the battles for Pokrovsk. Thus, the defense forces destroyed exactly 60 Russian assault troops who, under the cover of fog, tried to advance toward the city center and gain a foothold. Another 23 people were wounded. As a result, the occupiers' attempt to break through failed. At the same time, the enemy is still holding the old positions they took a few days earlier. According to the command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, search and assault operations are currently underway, and the entire city effectively remains a gray zone.
The enemy who entered through the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk has already established a certain bridgehead there, but the bridgehead is already being supplied logistically. And accordingly, the gray zone is very large, probably most of the city today. Although the lines on the northern edge of the city in the northern part of Pokrovsk are currently being held in particular by our paratroopers.
Another direction that regularly appears in military reports is the Kupiansk area. Despite Gerasimov's report about the encirclement of around 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers there, our command denies this information, instead reporting successes and the advance of the defense forces.
Today, it has not yet been possible to push the enemy out of Kupiansk itself, but the counter-attacking actions demonstrated by the defense forces today are steady advances. These are not some sudden counter-offensive operations, but rather counter-attacking actions. Nevertheless, this is allowing our defense forces to regain some tactical positions that had been lost there several weeks, several months ago, right in the city of Kupiansk itself.
The Russians have also become more active in the south of our country. The Zaporizhzhia direction, from where the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was drawing reserves to Pokrovsk, had been bringing rather alarming news for several weeks. However, the situation has now been stabilized.
The active offensive they declared a week ago is no longer taking place. Right now we are conducting strikes and firepower against their reserves. What is especially important is that we have now started destroying the railway that supplies these groups.
Analysts say the situation in Zaporizhzhia remains difficult. The enemy continues to concentrate forces and, using sabotage groups, infiltrates villages under Ukrainian control near the Kakhovka reservoir. However, these attacks repeatedly end in failure.
Once again, the Russians failed to take Stepnohersk or even the multi-story buildings in the southern part of the settlement. Only part of the buildings are under enemy control. Additional pressure on Stepnohersk is created by the enemy's attempts to break through along the road to Hrihorivka. To the north of the seaside dashes, there is a large open area, so the Russians don't even try to gain a foothold there, but instead, at great risk to themselves, dash a bit further north where there is a building and at least some kind of trench line.
But as the enemy advances in open fields, thanks to our artillery, they suffer colossal losses there, which is why the occupiers are no longer given vehicles and are sent into the assault exclusively on foot. At the same time, our defense forces managed to strike not only along the front line, but also deep in the Russian rear. In particular, the past day was marked by an unprecedented event. Special Operations Forces shot down a Russian military helicopter with a long-range drone, a Mi-8, right on Russian territory. As noted by the agency, this opens a new chapter in the war, giving the Ukrainian armed forces capabilities never seen before.
The thing is, previously Ukrainians shot down helicopters in the air using regular FPV drones with a maximum range of several dozen kilometers and warheads weighing about 1.5 kilograms. But in this case we see that it wasn't necessary to ram the drone into the helicopter thanks to the powerful warhead. But on the other hand, as you can see, this is happening at a different altitude, one that regular FPV drones might not be able to reach. And which is very important according to some sources, though this still needs to be verified, this is happening at a very long distance. In this case, it's the Rostov region, near the area of Kutenikovo. And what is Kutenikovo? Well, basically it's 200 kilometers from the line of contact.
The occupied territories were also affected. Part of the Donetsk region was plunged into a total blackout, which partially paralyzed the command of Russian forces. Among more than a dozen successful strikes, the explosions in Dokuchaevsk are particularly noteworthy. Analysts are still debating whether the nighttime glow was the result of a strike on a power plant or on an ammunition depot.
Whatever it was, either way, it's ultimately speaking in the end a blow to logistics operations. Because if a substation is destroyed, the group loses electricity. If the strike hits the ammunition depot, the group loses its shells. And that's important for the group that's currently advancing in Donetsk region. In other words, at the very least, it slows down their offensive potential.
At the same time, fighters on the ground are confirming this information. In particular, due to intensified strikes on Russian logistics in the Donetsk region, assault units have lost their steady supply of reserves and weapons and have lost momentum in their advance in places like Pokrovsk.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge everyone to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you're not able to do so financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russia is taking children from the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories of Donbas to Sakhalin for assimilation. This was reported by the Center for National Resistance.
Russia brought a group of school children from Shakhtarsk to the Sakhalin region under the pretense of a university program. These are honor students, participants in pro-Kremlin clubs, and children from families of Russian military personnel. They are given tours, shown universities, and are openly encouraged to build their lives in the Far East.
It is also stated that this is not an educational tour, but part of Russia's colonial program aimed at assimilating Ukrainian children and removing them from their Ukrainian cultural environment. During these tours, children are indoctrinated with the Sakhalin mentality, participate in integration activities, and are prepared for relocation.
The CNS notes this scheme traces back to the program for preparing the deportation of the adult population here to Siberia. Now Russia is launching a second initiative, the removal of youth from the occupied territories.
Moreover, the choice of region here is no coincidence. Russia is unable to populate Sakhalin, is in decline even with its own citizens, and so cynically tries to use Ukrainians from the temporarily occupied territories as a demographic resource. While the Kremlin denies attacks on EU territory, Russian propagandists not only effectively acknowledge these attacks, but also threaten that Russia has no intention of stopping. In fact, such a statement was made by propagandist Kazakov.
As we've long promised, we usually take out terrorists in the bathrooms. A bathroom can be located in any building in Europe, America, Africa, or Australia. That is, in order to take out terrorists in the bathroom, sometimes you have to demolish 12-story buildings. So Europeans, they really live in a paradise and think they're safe in their little house. And then when their gunpowder factories explode, it's supposedly because someone lit a cigarette in the wrong place nearby. When their bridges collapse, it's because of metal fatigue. Well, great. So just assume that all the metal in Europe has worn out at once. Just wait and keep counting.
Meanwhile, Russian propagandist YULIIA decided to comment on a video from a funeral in Ternopil.
Ternopil. This man lost his wife and 2 small children. At the funeral, clearly not fully understanding what was happening, he was rocking his son's coffin. In enemy media, this video spread everywhere, accompanied by cries of "Death to the Russians." But it is you, yes, you Ukrainians, who killed this little boy, his sister, his mother, and hundreds of other children on both sides of the front line.
In the footage, Vityazeva is referring to a father is rocking the coffin of his child, who was killed during the shelling of Ternopil on the night of November 19th. Out of the whole family, only Kamal survived. He waited for 3 days by the ruins of their home, hoping that rescuers would find his wife and children alive. But Kamal's wife Maria and their children Camilla and Nazar unfortunately died under the rubble. Let me remind you, as a result of Russia's strike on a residential building in Ternopil, 34 people have already died, including 6 children. And yes, such rhetoric has long become the norm for Russian propagandists who serve Putin's regime. But every time this rhetoric shocks me with its cannibalistic inhumanity. The Russian film studio, Mosfilm, and several state museums in the Leningrad region have been purchasing drones, electronic warfare systems, and Starlink for the Russian army under the guise of humanitarian aid. Journalists from the Russian editorial office of Radio Liberty report that these purchases became possible thanks to a government decree from 2022, which allows regional institutions to buy dual-use goods for those mobilized.
According to the Counterfocus database, from June 2024 to October 2025, the state unitary enterprise Mosfilm film concern purchased Mavic T3 drones from various suppliers, as well as various electronic warfare systems totaling almost 6 million rubles. One might assume that the studio is buying drones for filming, but the drone specifications don't match up with that purpose. We're not talking about the basic model, but the most expensive T3 version with a thermal imager. These drones cost between $5,000 and $7,000 each and are actively used by both Russian and Ukrainian military forces on the front lines.
It is known that the head of Mosfilm, Karen Shakhnazarov, is a trusted associate of Putin and actively supports the so-called special military operation. In 2025, Shakhnazarov was sanctioned by the EU, but the studio itself has so far avoided sanctions. But as they say, it's not just about Mosfilm. Radio Svoboda also discovered 3 museums in the Leningrad region that in 2024 and 2025, just like Mosfilm, purchased military equipment and even openly stated in the tender documents that it was intended for the needs of the special military operation. According to journalists, the Vyborg United Museum Reserve spent the most to support the Russian army.
In total, the museum spent about as much on military needs as Mosfilm, more than 5 million rubles. At the same time, the total volume of tenders for which the Vyborg Museum acted as the customer during the same period amounted to more than 160 million rubles. Although the Vyborg Museum, like other Russian cultural organizations, offers benefits to participants of the special military operation, direct technical assistance to the army was not publicized either on the museum's website and social media or in the media.
Meanwhile, officially in the Kremlin, let me remind you, they beat their chests and shout that they want peace. In reality, by the fourth year of the full-scale war against Ukraine, even museums have started supplying the Russian army. And in Russia, there's yet another cringe-worthy incident. Just listen to this. A United Russia Party deputy faked a marriage for his friend just so he could get death benefits. Propaganda Telegram channels report that Gazinur Timushev, a United Russia deputy from the Ulyanovsk region, and Ildar Kurmakayev, the coordinator of the local branch of the Defenders of the Fatherland Fund, were caught committing fraud. They forced their acquaintance to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense and enter into a fake marriage. At the same time, it is claimed that the Z-Patriots paid the girl 10,000 rubles. After sending the guy to the front line, they gained access to his bank card and spent about 580,000 rubles from it. When he went missing, the participants in the scheme tried to get 13.6 million rubles from the Ministry of Defense, but they were detained. Well, personally, I'm not surprised. There's nothing the Russian soul won't come up with for the sake of profit. And what do you think of this story? Write your thoughts, don't hold back in the comments. In Russian regions, money to finance the recruitment of new contract soldiers for the aggressor country's army is running out rapidly. How does the decrease in the flow of fresh cannon fodder affect the situation at the front? More on this coming up.
Putin's so-called special military operation is winding down. Russian regions have started to run out of money for contract soldiers. Officials from several Russian regions are reporting the cancellation of payments of 1.1 million rubles, allegedly due to a difficult budget situation. The first to stop luring potential contract soldiers with big money in 2025 was the Zabaikalsky Krai, followed by Khakassia, where they also announced that there was no money, but told people to hang in there. Now it's Yakutia's turn.
Yakutia has run out of money for payments to the military. The budget can't cope, said the Republic's finance minister, Ivan Alexeyev.
The problem with delayed payments beyond Baikal is so massive that after opposition channels in Russia reported it, even Kremlin media were forced to pick up the story. The widespread public outcry forced even Russian officials to acknowledge the problem.
The men are extremely outraged that after signing a contract and going off to defend the motherland, they have to wait months for the so-called relocation payments from the region. I won't read out everything they wrote to me because there are hardly any words fit for broadcast and I understand their emotions. I'll just quote the last sentence since it's suitable for broadcast and sums it all up. Please tell them over there that the officials' response that the budget is tight, we have no money, just hang in there, does not satisfy us.
It's especially hard to hang in there in such a situation for the occupiers who are already dead. Because of the refusal to pay the promised compensation to their families, the latter can't even be buried with dignity.
When a cargo 200 arrives, the family members receive 100,000 from the region plus 1,100,000. That amount was enough to arrange a proper funeral for their father, brother, or husband. Today, the most they get is like 100,000, and that's only if they show up on time. There's nothing to pay for the burial.
And it's only going to get worse, economists are now warning. The Russian treasury is empty. Because of Western sanctions, the freezing of Kremlin assets, and the widespread rejection of Putin's bloody energy resources, Russia has nothing to pay its own soldiers with.
The Russian economy has entered a downward spiral, one that is already quite active, noticeable, and undeniable. And it's unlikely that it will be able to get out of this spiral easily. It's unclear whether it will be able to get out at all.
Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but it seems that Western and American sanctions have indeed broken the back of the Russian economy. In its plans and budgets for 2025, the Kremlin has clearly set its expectations too high.
They're relying on different oil prices, on a different dollar exchange rate, which simply doesn't exist at the moment.
As a result, there's no money to pay each new soldier 2.5 million rubles for signing a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. The same goes for compensation for injuries and deaths of servicemen. Everyone who went to war hoping to make some money will now only earn themselves a one-way ticket.
This has been going on since around September 2024. So since September 2024, that's almost a year and a half. Actually, it's already more than a year and a half. In general, the Russian economy is not growing. How long has it been then? Since September, so we're already approaching a year and a half. So the economy isn't growing, and moreover, it's actually declining. And it continues and is getting worse. Moreover, the financial situation of companies is deteriorating. They are losing profits, and as a result, corporate tax payments are decreasing. Because of this, regional budgets are already in serious trouble.
In order to somehow reassure the families of Russian contract soldiers and grieving widows, Kremlin officials verbally promised to resolve the issue as soon as possible.
It seems that the Republic's government has already found a solution. The minister promised to resume the payments.
However, all of this is just empty words. After all, there is simply nowhere to get that much money to support Putin's campaign. For now, the gaps are being patched using budgets for healthcare, utilities and education. But even all of them together won't cover even a third of the expenses for the special military operation. Meanwhile, Russian Z military correspondents are already loudly reporting widespread discontent among Kremlin contract soldiers. None of them are eager to die for an idea rather than for money. And on some sections of the front, Z correspondents admit after the news about the Kremlin stopping payments, cases of going AWOL and desertion have sharply increased.
And now, news from Russia's Avtovaz. The Lada Niva Sport, priced at 1.7 million rubles, may be discontinued due to lack of demand. According to the pro-government Telegram channel MASH, sales of the so-called sports car, which leaks oil and antifreeze, have plummeted fivefold. If the factory used to produce 250 Nivas a month, now it's only 50 because nobody is buying them. Despite its hefty price tag, the new domestic car lacks anti-corrosion protection, and inside it has an old-style gearbox and an outdated 16-valve engine. A similar fate befell the Lada Largus, which started being pulled from sale due to a steering wheel that locks up. At the same time, Avtovaz denied all the problems. That's Russia for you, great and mighty. But only in words? In reality, they can't even assemble a decent car. Unless it's a piece of junk cobbled together from sticks and mud that nobody wants. Russians have started preparing for an inflation shock due to tax increases. Russian consumers are bracing for a new wave of accelerated price growth because of the tax hikes set to begin in 2026. What will 2026 look like financially for ordinary, patriotic Russians? More on this coming up.
The further it goes, the worse it gets. Putin's fairy tales about a wonderful life in Russia have failed.
I doubt I can add anything new here.
The dictators made up stories that the country is developing despite unprecedented sanctions and pressure from the Western world.
Overall, the situation is stable and reliable.
Don't stand up to the facts. Putin is on the brink of economic disaster.
Everything's fine, we're falling. That phrase, everything's fine, we're falling, is exactly what characterizes the Russian economy. When they say everything is fine, but at the same time the decline is more than obvious.
The Russian authorities are preparing the population for a sharp decline in living standards due to a record budget deficit, which in 2025 will reach almost 6 trillion rubles.
The budget deficit of 5.7 trillion, which is being discussed by the Russian Ministry of Finance, is based on their planned calculations. But when it comes to estimates from more independent sources, let's call them that, such as, for example, the former first deputy head of the Russian Central Bank, Vyugin, he said that the budget deficit will be 8 trillion. It's definitely not 5.7.
To cover the financial gap, the Kremlin plans to raise taxes.
This means increasing taxes and fees. And Russia is going ahead with this. Starting January 1st, the value-added tax will be increased from 20 to 22%. But there will also be a recycling fee introduced. The environmental fee will be, or rather, the recycling fee will be increased, the environmental fee will be increased, and new fees will also be introduced.
The government also plans to freeze funds in bank accounts and further cut social spending. Maternity capital will only be paid for the third child, and the family mortgage program will be shifted onto the regions.
This is what the propaganda is talking about. Mardan is one of the leading Russian propagandists. And also the so-called Orthodox oligarch Malofev. They say that the state should not pay pensions. In other words, the abolition of pensions. Another consequence is that the state will allocate less money for salaries in the public sector. Accordingly, layoffs are possible here as well. And then what could potentially happen next, and what this really means, is money printing.
Economists note that Russia is facing a typical wartime crisis: rising military spending, a budget deficit, and increasing prices for fuel and food. Annual inflation in Russia has exceeded 8%, and gasoline prices have risen by more than 10%.
Inflation will accelerate, precisely because this money will be injected, and because, or rather due to tax increases, this will further fuel inflation. At the same time, inflation in Russia without Tavan is low. Officially, of course, it's 8%, but people who follow this issue say that inflation in Russia, let's put it this way, for food products and goods and products that are commonly used in daily life, such as groceries and household items, it's about 28 to 32%.
Also, the second VAT rate increase in the last 7 years, scheduled for 2026, will put Russia among the top 20 countries in the world in terms of this tax. Only a few European countries have a higher VAT rate. And outside the European region, Russia will share the lead with Uruguay.
And in Russia, yes, they are willing to raise this VAT. It will undoubtedly hit the entire economy hard, affecting the whole supply chain. And when we talk about the supply chain, it means that every time a product is sold multiple times, each time you'll have to pay 2% more. So it might seem like a small thing, but it will have a very, very unpleasant impact, especially on the population. Accordingly, when Russia becomes a leader among countries in this tax, it basically means that in Russia it's not profitable to create added value, which essentially means it's more profitable to do nothing at all.
Simply put, the Kremlin dictator, by starting a war against Ukraine, is single-handedly destroying his own empire, which will inevitably collapse sooner or later.
And finally, a prison riot against the war. According to reports from Russian social media in Kstovo, a group of Russian convicts who were being transported from prison to the so-called special military operation escaped.
The convicts were being transported from prison to take part in the special military operation. During the escape, the driver of the escort vehicle was killed. At present, reinforced police units are actively searching for the escapees. The criminals may be in Kudrovo and the surrounding areas.
Well, what can you say? Exactly. Why go to a meat grinder and die when you can stage a special military operation at home? Like, if you agree, what do you think of our news? Write to us about what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you